Hi, my name is Jemmy, and this is my integrated lesson plan for math and social studies. This is for an 8th grade class, and it is primarily a math lesson with social studies integrated into it. Because I decided to take a math lesson that I had already written and integrate social studies into it, everything from math, my instructional goal, academic standards, essential content, instructional objective were already written. So to add to it, my social studies goal is to identify why a historical landmark has significance to the culture it resides in. I'll dive a little deeper into that in the instructional objective. For my standards, I chose for the PA standard, I chose illustrate how historical documents, artifacts, and sites are critical to world history. I chose this because I wanted to integrate historical landmarks, so that's a specific site, and then dive into how that site is important or critical to world history. For the NCSS standard, I chose a geography standard. I've thought, after looking through all of them, that that would fit the best with my plan and what my goal was. So I chose explain how the physical and human characteristics of places and regions are connected to human identities and cultures, because I wanted students to dive into the influence and the importance of the landmark and the culture that it is in. For my essential content, again, everything was already written for math, so it was primarily everything that has to do with surface areas, so all of my formulas, all the information students would need to know for that. Specifically for social studies, though, I wanted to leave this part a little bit more broad because I wanted students to do their own inquiry and dive into their own interests. So I listed the essential content only as famous historical landmarks from cultures around the world, and then I left specific guidelines as to what I was looking for that. For my instructional objective for math, it all has to do with creating correct drawings of 3D shapes that are algebraically correct, and choosing the 3D shapes that they are and then deconstructing them into 2D drawings. All have to do with the accuracy of that. For my social studies instructional objective, it has to do with the research and then the presentation of that research on the historical landmark that the students would have chosen. So I'm requiring them to have done research, pick a landmark, and then write a 5 to 8 sentence paragraph summarizing their findings. And then in the quality section, I did leave the specific details or points that I am looking for that little summary. Because this is a primarily a math lesson, I am not putting as much emphasis on social studies, but I did want to at least put something and have some explanation or integration of that kind of content. This lesson plan is actually pretty lengthy. It goes over a period of 7 days, but I'm just going to go ahead and walk through each day and kind of what it's about. So for day 1, and day 2 actually, it's the introduction of the mathematical concepts and teaching all of that. So the surface area for 3D objects, how to solve them, what formulas to use, how to look at an object and figure out which formula you're going to use, how to input the data, so on and so forth. That's what day 1 and day 2 is focused on. Purely all math, nothing social studies yet. Day 3 is actually when I begin to integrate social studies. This is when I'll introduce the final project that I'll be doing, which integrates math and social studies. To introduce this topic, or to introduce the topic in the project, I'm actually going to have a guest speaker come in. This is one of the 2 components that we need for this lesson. I'm going to have an architect come in because my goal for the integration of social studies into math is to give the idea that math concepts used can be applied to other subjects. So in this case, architecture, we're dealing with surface area and tying that into buildings, historical landmarks. So hopefully, if I could find somebody, I'd find an architect who has had experience designing buildings for companies or clients in other countries. So at least they even, hopefully, maybe have a perspective on what it's like to design buildings for different cultures. Maybe they had separate guidelines that they needed, or they wanted their building a certain way. So hopefully to find someone that with that experience, I'd have them come in, talk about that, talk about their experience, how they've used math in their profession. So it wouldn't be too long, but at least a short little introduction and kind of a talk about what they do as well, and to give students an idea that there is integration between subjects. Day 4 is when I'll actually integrate the math part into this, introduce that part of the project. I will go over how to deconstruct 3D shapes for the rectangular prism, triangular prism, and cylinder. I'll also go over kind of idea of how to choose which 3D shapes to represent or to model the historical landmark that students have chosen. So for example, if they're doing the Pyramids of Giza, then maybe they're going to choose triangular prisms and do multiple ones of those. But if they only choose those, I do have certain requirements where they have to do one of each. So they'll have to do a rectangular prism somehow as well as a cylinder. But making sure that at least some part or the whole part of the shapes that they choose, if they put them together, or at least some parts of them together, it will form their historical landmark. Days 5 through 7 are all work days for when students can work on this, solidify even their explanation for their historical landmark, but I will be working with them, checking in with them, each of the students throughout this time. At the end of day 4, as they're beginning to plan, I will meet with each student and ask them what their ideas are, and I'll record that, so I'll have an idea of what each student will want to be doing and how I can best help them, how I can check in with them, or even dialogue with them, say, hey, maybe this isn't the best selection of shapes to use for this project. How about we try something else? So yeah. And in addition to that, I'll continue to do that from days 5 through 7. Having that record on day 4 will allow me to continue to check in with my students and see where they're at and record the progress as they've been going through the project. So the summative assessment is this whole project altogether presented, their final 3D or 2D drawings. And that is the 3D project component. We needed that second component for this lesson, integration, and that is what this is. In terms of modifications and accommodations for individual learners, if there are students who need extra help with notes or concepts, I'll have that written down and highlighted for them. Make sure I don't rush through my material. This will help some else if I have them in my class, but definitely it'll benefit everyone else. And as I go through each work day with them, seeing where they're at, if I need to check in with students even further or have them come in on some extra time because I know they won't be able to finish, I can have them do that during a flex or sword period. The materials that my students will need is pretty straightforward. I'll need an overhead projector with a smartboard to do my presentations on them. But of course, having a smart notebook on the computer with my notes and examples for my presentations and my lessons is needed. Students will need their math workbook for the math lessons that I do in the beginning. They'll need their project packet when we start a project. They'll need any kind of stationery that they might want to use, whether it's whiteboard markers, the smart pen for our interactions with the smartboard during the lesson, or pencils, graph paper, scissors, color pencils, pens, all of that. Stationery for creating their project is needed as well. And then of course rubrics and instructions for the project and what I'm looking for. In terms of advanced preparations, definitely the teaching notes for the lesson, what questions to ask at what point in the lesson, for math, guiding questions as they investigate or dive into what they want to do for the social studies component. I'll have to definitely create the answer keys for the questions we complete in class, the instructions and the rubrics for my project, and of course have enough copies of the project packet printed for my students. And my references are as listed. So yeah, that's pretty much my integrated lesson plan. Again, the main goal for this was to integrate social studies into math, so still have math as the primary subject for this lesson, but kind of show how social studies can be related to math and even how math is related to experiences outside the classroom. So tying in architecture and tying that into future careers, having my students see that was definitely a big component of my lesson. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks!